I was there and left and came back. So he was there when I was there the first time, and so he had to have been there, I'm going to say 4 to 6 years.
Okay. And about how often would you interact with Officer Lines?
I interacted with him every day, whether it was at lunch and working with our kids. We have lunch duty, and he was always in there with us. But if you mean on situations, um, I would say weekly. It just depends. Whether it was a fight or something like that. Maybe not weekly. That's actually not accurate. We don't have that many fights. Few times. Few times a month, maybe.
Okay. So, based on your experience interacting with Officer Lines a few times a month and over the years that you were employed with Chandler Unified School District, including, the first time leaving and coming back, um, do you have a belief about whether or not Officer Lines knows more about criminal law than you?
Well, I hope so. He's a police officer, so yes, he would have. I'm not trained. That's not any part of my training as an educator or a counselor or an administrator to know criminal law.
Okay, so within your role and how you've interacted with Officer Lines in the past, do you defer to Officer Lines about whether or not something could or could not be a crime?
Absolutely.
And do you rely on Officer Lines for that expertise?
Yes, because that is our mandatory reporter, and that's who that information goes to, and that is his role.
So it's your understanding that that's Officer Lines' role at the school site.
Your
Correct.
Honor, I'd like to object on relevance. As you know, those mandatory report claims have been dismissed, and I'd like to hear testimony from the witness about the claims that remain. And, we've gone on about this mandatory reporting duty with this witness for almost all of her testimony, it feels like, through mine and with Mr. Anger.
This is
Relevance.
this is relevant to her frame of mind about why she took the action that she did, which is before the PPAC. And her past experience with Officer Lines, his expertise, his role at the school site, all of this is directly relevant to why we're here.
But you know that the mandatory reporting is not
Yeah.
with regard to the sexual statutes.
Yes, but for this particular witness who has testified that she was involved in this for less than half a day, I think the question before the PPAC, which is specifically identified in 1308A1, is whether or not she took reasonable action. And so, did she take reasonable action based on her prior experience, based on Officer Lyons' experience, based on her understanding of who the expert in criminal law is at the school site?
I fail to see Officer Lyons' expertise as it relates to 1308.
About whether or not something could constitute a crime or not, and deferring to
Yeah, we're not there.
The expert. I agree that we're not there.
So I'm going to sustain the objection.
Okay. Would you, is based on your experience at Chandler Unified School District, is part of Officer Lyons' role at the school site, does it relate to student safety?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, and help me understand that a little bit better.
Student safety, he is the first person that makes the decision on any type of threat or lockdown. Anything that has to do with safety goes through our SRO. They're the first point of contact for the police department. They are an extension, a part of that department on our campus.
You've answered the question. Next question.
So, as part of Officer Lyons' role for student safety, how might he get involved related to student safety?
Well, it might depend. I know that there's been times where officers have contacted me first because they've received threats or something in the maybe on social media or from families, and so then they will contact us and get us involved to work with them on the threat. Other times it's us getting them involved because we've received information that we want to seek guidance on or work in conjunction with to ensure that we are following proper protocol and procedure in keeping our students safe.
So when Officer Lyons gets involved in a situation, is part of that to promote student safety?
Yes.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Do you have any cross-examination for this witness?
I do.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, or morning, Ms. Woodworth. You testified that the COVID-19 pandemic was a miserable time during your career, a new and scary experience, and it shifted your world. Is that accurate? What about those students you interviewed in February of 2021? What was your impression of the experience that they were sharing with you?
Your mic is not on.
Can you please clarify the experience? Are you speaking just to that day or their experience during COVID as well?
Ms. Woodworth, I'm speaking specifically about the conversations you had with the students that you interviewed regarding Patrick Power's conduct.
Okay, and restate again, sorry.
What was your impression of the experience that they were having with Mr. Power?
My impression is they were having an experience that I never discredited their experience. That was their reality, and I listened to that reality and I shared that reality.
I would like you to describe what your impression of their reality was.
I also have to remind you it was 4 years ago, and I cannot accurately get that into a statement and be honest and accurate with you because I don't have 100% memory of that day.
Outside of this instance with student A and at least student C, who you met with, have you ever had to interview students relating to uncomfortable touching they had experienced from a teacher?
Yes.
Ever?
Yes.
When?
You want specific dates or?
Just if you can recall, if there's one other time, whether it's roughly a decade ago, a few years ago, months ago.
Again, repeat your question.
I'm just asking, outside of this one, February 2021, you get called in, you meet with two students who are confiding in you,
Yes.
experiences they had with Mr. Power. And I just want to know, have you ever had to do that before with other students? Interview them, specifically about uncomfortable physical contact they had with a teacher.
Yes,
Was it after this incident, before this incident?
it was after.
Okay. So at this time, that was the first time you've ever had to be involved in this type of situation.
Correct.
And again, I don't need you to have the full, every single thing that was said in that room. I just want to know, what you remember and what was your impression of how those students were doing.
I think I answered that. I think I said I can't speak to that 100% because I can guess if that's what you want and remember and tell you what I think the students would be feeling from my interactions with students every day. But to tell you specifically what each and every one of those students, how they responded, I can't do that. And I think I answered that question for you.
Do you still have Exhibit 6 still open in front of you?
From my interactions with students every day, but to tell you specifically what each and every one of those students, how they responded, I can't do that. And I think I answered that question for you.
And on the second page of Exhibit 6 on 23, there's the describe the injury of anyone involved, if any, and that's blank. And you testified as to that. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Did you believe that those students had no injury resulting from the experience they had from Mr. Power?
You're asking me to speculate. So I'm going to say to you, it
Please be
wasn't written
responsive to the
there.
question. I will determine if it's a speculative question, not you. So please answer the question directly.
You have to repeat it.
Was it your impression, the students you interviewed, regarding the allegations of involving Mr. Power in February 2021, had no adverse effect to them relating to that conduct? Was it your impression, the students you interviewed?
I can't say in that moment that there was no adverse effect. They were in there because they were upset and we were having a conversation. That's what I can say.
So they were upset.
Well, anytime a student comes forward, they were upset. I don't think we've ever stated that they weren't upset.
Were they upset at all about the sensitivity of the type of allegations that were involved with Mr. Power?
I would assume, again, I can't speak to 100% of the conversations that I had that day 4 years ago.
So you didn't think that those students in any way, shape, or form needed support from?
Did not say
Objection,
that.
asked and answered.
I have not heard that question. I've heard, were they injured? But I haven't heard, need support from you. Never heard that question. So overruled.
And I think I did answer. I said I did not say that.
I wasn't asking if you said it. I just wanted to know, was it your impression that those students didn't need any support from you? And I might elaborate even more broader, didn't need any support from anybody after your conversations that you had with them?
Objection, compound question.
Was it your impression that those students didn't need any support?
Restate.
Okay. Miss
Sustained.
Woodworth. Thank you. Miss Woodworth, when you left those student interviews with student A and student C, was it your impression those students didn't need any support from anybody at the school after what you learned? When you left those student interviews, student A and student C, was it your impression those students?
Sorry, this question is worded oddly. I wouldn't say that they didn't need support.
Let's keep
I think
our,
that all students need support.
let's keep our criticism of the question to ourselves, please.
I think I just answered that.
They didn't need support. I didn't hear your answer. You were talking at the same time I was.
Did you get my answer? I said that students, I said that all students need support.
I'll be more specific. As an experienced guidance counselor, it's your impression that a 12-year-old girls who are alleging that a person in a superior position, a teacher, is touching them uncomfortably, that they don't need support through that process.
Again, I did not. I just said they would need support. I never said they wouldn't need support.
And what measures did you take to ensure those students got support?
At that time, my role in the situation was to come in and clarify information and add to it if needed. I was then dismissed from that situation because it was under investigation with other administrators and counselors on campus.
And Ms. Woodworth, did you understand, I think you've heard testimony throughout today, and you can contradict it if you would like, that you were brought in as a female administrator who could potentially, relate more to these young girls. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And you felt comfortable after you left the meeting with the other administrators that you didn't have to do anything more for these young girls?
I felt that it was in the hands of our administration, of our SRO, of our district personnel, and junior high counselors. Yes.
And speaking of the SRO, I just want to follow up a bit on the SRO's duties that you testified to. Is it the SRO's job to monitor teacher conduct?
No.
Is it the SRO's job to monitor and follow up on a teacher's conduct after they receive a letter of direction?
No.
Is it a SRO's job to determine whether or not a student needs mental health support?
I could say yes on that one.
Okay, and in addition to that, potentially being a role of an SRO, would it be a duty of a administrator to ensure that students are getting the mental health support that they need?
Yes.
Okay, and in addition to that, potentially being a role of an SRO, would it be a duty of a administrator? And you testified a lot about the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the school's resources, including in the counseling department. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Ms. Woodworth, did you take any step to seek out a counselor for these students that you interviewed in February of 2021?
They were already working with our site counselor, and that was already being handled from the site. The counselor had been involved. Our site counselor had been involved. That's how it came to administration. Again, I was involved that day. I was dismissed, and they continued on with the rest of the situation.
That might be new. Who is the site counselor that you're referring to right now?
I believe it was Miss Glascom who she reported to, or who I think that's who was involved.
And what's Miss
Would have been one of two.
What's
Does the
Miss
court
Glass?
reporter need that name spelled?
GLASCOM. GLASCOM.
Did you have personal knowledge that Miss Glasscomb was providing mental health support for these students?
No.
Did you have personal knowledge that? And I wanted to ask again. I understand your testimony is that you knew others were in the room who could maybe help out, but I just want to affirm from you, what did you personally do to ensure that these students got supportive measures they may need?
Personally, I did not, because if I'm allowed to speak and explain.
No, you've answered the question.
Okay.
Do you have Exhibit 6 in front of you?
If I'm allowed to speak and explain.
No, you've answered the question.
And again, you testified that this was the first time you had been brought in to speak with students involving these type of allegations with the teacher, right?
Yes.
And that you're very attentive to detail and I might use a different word, but a dubious note taker.
Yes.
Why didn't you take any notes when you met with student A?
Because if I don't have notes in there, that means that the conversation that we had was strikingly similar to one that was on the paper. I would have taken notes if there was something outlined.
And we went over this the past 2 days, but Exhibit 11 has notes from Mr. Falloon per Shelamae that student A added additional details to her statement. Isn't that right?
That is correct. I said that.
And you also testified you're very detail-oriented.
Yes.
And under the names of other involved in the incident and names of others who observed the incident, there's a lot of redactions that don't have an acronym like a student A, student B associated with them. Is that right?
Yes.
Why didn't you follow up with them?
Because again, my role was to simply that day speak to the two students that I was asked to speak to see if they had further information. My role was I was not asked to get any more or obtain any more witness statements. I was not asked to follow up with families. I was not asked to do any of that because it was already being done. Have I been asked that in the past by an administrator, by Mr. Phillips, by my current administration to please do something? Yes, but we do not insert ourselves into other individuals' investigations.
And more generally on, support of students, is it your testimony that if it's not your assigned role, you don't have a duty to ensure that a student is going through a traumatizing experience is given the support they need to ensure that they have a healthy and safe learning environment?
Can you repeat the question part of that, please?
I'm going to ask the court reporter to repeat it.
Can you repeat the question part of that, please?
I'm going to ask the court reporter to repeat it.
How it's going through an experience is given the support they need to ensure that they have a healthy and safe learning environment.
No.
Thank you. I may now misremember that. No, as in you don't have a duty to do that, or you do?
I do have a duty to do that.
How did you meet that duty with these students in February of 2021?
This was being handled by two other administrators, including my principal, by an SRO, and by my district. So that was being handled. If there was a situation, there are a number of situations that come to me first, regardless of whether they were my alpha, and I took the lead. Nobody else jumped in unless I needed help on those situations. So I have individuals on that campus managing that investigation, and then I have my own students and situations at that time that I'm working on. I don't generally jump into other people's realms unless they ask me for my help. That is common practice across the board.
Ms. Woodworth, weren't you asked to come into this? Weren't you? And I'll strike that question. We heard a lot of testimony today from Mr. Phillip. I mean, not today, but just generally from Phillips, Falloon, and Ridenauer. It was my impression they attributed you of being a part of the team. Would you disagree with that?
I was a part of the team for that day, so I would disagree with that.
And you believe once that day ended, your role with these students, it was over?
Yes.
No further questions.
Any redirect, Mr. Anger?
And you believe once that day ended, your role with these students.
So you were asked a question about whether or not you did anything personally to follow up with the students, and you started to explain your position. Can you just tell me why?
Why I didn't follow up with the students
That's right.
necessarily? Yeah. So as I think we discussed, we were 712 high school, and at the time my caseload was in the high school area. I probably had 650 students or so, maybe a little more on my caseload. So that is also part of why we have those boundaries so that we can support those kids. So I guess maybe bandwidth too. Like if I had been asked or needed to or didn't think that it was being taken care of, I would have done that, or I would have jumped in and helped. But because my focus was high school and those students were junior high and they were working with the junior high administration, and there is another female administrator for the junior high, then I went back to, I guess, my world and my caseload and what I was doing that day.
Can you tell me about I guess, the split that you're describing about you're responsible for high school students? Can you tell me more about that?
Okay. Can you give me, well, just in general, my role for so I'm involved in discipline for those students. So I think yesterday I said I was O through Z, if I remember correctly at the time. So I would do discipline. I would do anything related to family concerns. I would also be in charge of, I don't know if this answers your question, so I apologize. Was in charge of like the SPED department and SPED evaluations. I can't remember if I was over math at the time. Am I answering the question? I was in charge of curriculum and the master schedule and creating that for the 712. I was in charge of, I felt like lots of phone calls. I don't know that I'm answering your question specifically. But the junior high, I think you asked about the split. I'm sorry. We had 2 administrators at the junior high. For the 7th and 8th grade. They also had other duties, but they oversaw the discipline and concerns for 7th and 8th grade. And then we had 3 assistant principals at the high school and 1 principal over the whole school.
Okay, and do you know about how many students at the time were enrolled at Castile?
When I started that year, we had, I want to say between 32 and 3,300.
Okay, and about how many of those students were within the high school domain that you were responsible for?
I'm going to say 2,300 to 2,400.
Okay. There was a question about your note taking on these student witness forms. And I want to just show you Exhibit 8. And I'm looking specifically at page 0028. Do you see the word tech theater
Yes.
written there?
Yeah.
Okay, and
Yes.
is that your handwriting?
Yes.
Okay, and why did you write that there?
My best recollection, I guess, would be I was clarifying maybe what class this was taking place in, so I wrote that down.
Okay, so what is your understanding of what tech theater is?
Tech theater is, tech theater and tech basics are very similar, but basically technical theater is anything to do with behind the scenes of a production, a play, musical. So our tech theater students are involved in setting up for our band performances and our dances, as well as our musicals and our plays each year. So they're everything from opening the curtains to creating, putting the sets on stage. They are in charge of sound and audio. So that would be miking up individuals, ensuring that the speakers are working and the sound and volume level. They would be, trying to think of all the others. I know there's sewing machines and they would do costumes for, and I don't know the level of which, but that's a part of a tech theater class is making costumes. Makeup can be a part of a tech theater class. Opening curtains and moving sets and lots of physical movement, lots of moving parts.
Okay, so you threw out a number of things there, so I just want to ask some follow-up about that. Did you just mention that it includes building sets?
Yes.
Okay, and
Power tools. That's frightening. Yes.
and how are the sets built?
And hearing Officer Lee, I'm going to object. This is redirect, follow up on my cross-examination. I don't recall us going into the details of what is the tech theater class and what it entailed.
The door was opened when he asked the question about do you take copious notes or not. She has just testified that she wrote down tech theater on here. I'm asking why that was important in her mind to write that down, understanding the class, and now I'm going further into the witness's mind about why that might be important.
I think she did answer the question about why she wrote that. She was able to remember that today.
And I'm simply asking why.
I'm just not following the relevance. Maybe you'll tie it up. I'll let you continue. But
Thank you.
We're certainly learning a lot about tech theater, and I'm reaching for the relevance here.
Sure. So you just
So I'm going to
testified.
overrule the objection.
Thank you, Hearing Officer Lee. So you just testified that I think the last thing you said was use of power tools.
Yes.
Is that right? So was tech theater includes the use of power tools?
Yes, it can. There's a garage, a very large space where they create their sets and their hammering and sawing and, again, frightening things when students have power tools, but they do an amazing job. So, yes.
Does the teacher instruct students on how to use power tools?
Yes.
Does the teacher observe the students' use of power tools to ensure they might be using a safe?
Yes.
Objection, relevance.
Relevance, but has she been in this classroom watching a teacher do that? I don't have. I need some foundation for her knowing exactly what a teacher does in showing power tools to a student. Thank you.
Have you observed any tech theater courses?
Yes.
Okay, and are you responsible for building the master schedule for the school?
Yes.
Does that include knowing some portion of what occurs in a tech theater course?
Yes.
Thank you. So
I would still ask for during this time period if she could testify if she had that knowledge of what was going on in that specific tech theater class led by Mr. Power.
That would be helpful. So I'm going to sustain that if that was an objection. Let's get to the nitty gritty. Has she seen Mr. Powers instruct students on power tools, please?
based on your understanding of tech theater, not only in this incident, but in your opinion, is it unusual for a tech theater teacher to touch students during instruction?
Foundation.
She's laid the foundation already. She said she's observed courses. She built the master schedule.
But he's asking for an opinion of her knowledge generally about what goes on. And again, we're getting really away from the specific tech theater class led by Mr. Power that we're actually here to talk about.
We're here to ask about her opinion and how her opinion informed what happened here.
I have no choice but to voir dire the witness at this point. Have you ever been in the room when Mr. Power instructed students on power tools?
I have no choice but to voir dire the witness at this point.
With that,
Please move on.
I've got nothing further.
When Mr. Power instructed students on power tools.
It is 11:42.
Please move on.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I got distracted. Questions from the committee. Ms. Sawyer Sinkfield, then Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Hearing Officer Lee. Ms. Woodworth, you had mentioned a couple of different times that your sole role in the interview was to interview the female students, the two female students.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. And that you would not step on other administrators' toes during their investigation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So by chance, if you saw another school administrator not following proper procedure or the way an investigation was being handled, would you speak up to higher ups?
Yes.
Okay. And my other question is Exhibit 6 on that first page, which is page 22. And I have asked the same question to Dr. Gilbert and Dr. Filone. On this page, we see nothing at the top. This was the original statement. If you go to Exhibit D, get it real quick, which is the Title IX complaint on page 35 at the top. Page 35. Up at the top, it says talk to parent, wants out immediately. Did you write that statement?
No.
Thank you.
Is that it, Ms. Sawyer-Sigfield? Mr. Nielsen, and then Dr. Sador.
Mine was covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sador?
Just like to follow up on a question that Ms. Sawyer-Sinkfield just asked you, and that was if you noted that there was another administrator that was not following up on protocol, wasn't doing what they needed to do, that you would report that.
Yes.
Has that ever happened?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, we follow a chain of command in our district, right? So my direct supervisor would be my principal. And so if I had concerns, I would take them to him and share that information. Do you want a specific?
I do.
Most specifically, most recently. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of. Most specifically, most recently. Concerns that an administrator is not following through with families or taking things seriously in an investigation. And that would have been taken to my principal.
Is that what you did
In
that
that
situation?
situation, yes.
How is that different from this situation?
I didn't have any reason to believe that it wasn't being followed. I was involved in that day, in that moment. I didn't have any information about the investigation beyond that day that I was there. Nothing prior, nothing after, and so I wouldn't know if it was not being addressed properly.
Just one more follow-up. You mentioned that the SRO is there as a point of contact from the police department, where if you need to make a report under your mandatory obligation to report, that's who you would typically go to. Has there ever been an instance where you disagreed with what the officer gave you as far as advice, where you went ahead and thought, I need to report this anyway?
Maybe maybe to DCS. I know that sometimes they're not as
Just a yes or no?
Yes,
Yes, you have made reports where
like
he
the
didn't.
DCS. Yes,
Could you give the court reporter the meaning of those initials?
Department of Child Safety.
Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm asking is, if there was a situation where Officer Lyons would have said, I don't think that there's anything here, would you, if you felt like you had still, I think I need to report this,
Yes.
what would you do next?
Well, Depending on, obviously it would depend on the situation. Like I said, if it was a DCS situation, I would send that up, or I would confer with my principal or HR.
Okay. And that's, thank you.
Further questions? All right, your excuse as a witness. Thank you for your testimony. All right, it's 11:48. Probably a good time to break for lunch. Let's try to be back at 12:20.
We're live.
All right. Mr. Inger or Ms. Brandingham, please call your next witness.
Your Honor, first, can we ask a housekeeping question, which would be the amount of time left for both sides?
Of course. Ms. Stoller, are you able to answer?